Picture the average medieval peasant, ankle deep in mud, ducking through a straw thatched doorway, chased by an unusually ambitious chicken. It's a scene ripped straight from a Monty Python sketch. Peasants perpetually marinating in filth, living in mud huts, as if the entire Middle Ages took place in a soggy swamp. But brace yourselves. This soggy stereotype is about as accurate as calling the internet a passing fad. Let's clear some dirt. The classic myth says all medieval homes were primitive, unhygienic piles of mud. Sure, your everyday rural Joe or Joan probably lived in a humble wattle and daub cottage, a stick and mud sandwich of a wall, sometimes shared with livestock so friendly they might as well appear on the rent roll. But just down the lane, some savvy peasants boasted timber framed or hold on to your mop caps, actual stone houses. Think of it as the medieval version of keeping up with the Joneses, only with a fire pit that doesn't double as a smoke machine. If you wandered into a medieval city, you'd find multi-story buildings looming over the market, extra floors included. Urban planners of the time really hated fire, and who could blame them? Wooden cities plus candles equals disaster waiting to happen, so they shelled out for stonework where it counted. Ventilation? Basically, huge holes in the walls. But hey, no one ever complained about stale air. Cleanliness wasn't just a saintly myth. Medieval folk swept floors, whitewashed walls. Yes, that's not just a Pinterest trend, and sprinkled fragrant herbs underfoot. Indoor plumbing was a fantasy, sure, but people used public bathhouses and wells. Soap was rare but real, not some medieval urban legend. The only thing muddier than their shoes was the reputation of their architecture. And castles? If dust and mud huts were the norm, those grand stone fortresses must have been elaborate pranks. Sorry, mud hut enthusiasts. Sometimes history is built to last. Living in such simple homes contributed to the perception that medieval people were perpetually unclean. Picture medieval peasants slogging through mud, caked in filth, smelling like a gym locker after a broccoli eating contest. Ah, the classic Dark Ages hygiene myth. But hold your noses. Before you assume everyone back then sported a personal aroma strong enough to wilt crops, let's pour some cold water on that stinky stereotype. The idea that medieval folks never bathed? About as accurate as trying to scuba dive in a suit of armor. In reality, many people, especially the wealthy, bathed regularly. Queen Isabella of Castile reportedly bathed twice a day. Proof the secret to ruling Spain might just have been killer hygiene. Public bathhouses weren't just Roman relics or modern day spa indulgences. Medieval Europe had them, welcoming commoners and nobles alike. If medieval people really hated water, someone should have warned their socks come rainy season. Bathing wasn't merely a chance to soak and swap gossip, or accidentally invent the proto-bubble bath by agitating soapy water in a barrel. It also carried serious religious and health clout. Cleanliness was practically sacred, a daily ritual entwined with faith and wellness. Granted, during scare times like plague years, bathers got a bit paranoid, fearing those bad airs. Plus, soap was pricey, and hauling water in the dead of winter redefined ice bucket challenge. Cold castles meant more layers and less lather. Sure, no era is immune to its own funk. Some medieval folk probably did reek. But let's be honest, so do plenty of modern marathon runners after a 26-mile glory run. Our nose wrinkling image of medieval stinkiness owes more to later centuries peering down their perfumed noses at their ancestors than to hard facts. Which begs the question, what embarrassing misconceptions will future historians cook up about our bubble baths? Along with their hygiene habits, the diet of the peasantry was also seen as meager and insufficient. The image of medieval peasants gnawing stale bread and sipping dubious water is as tired as a peasant after harvest. If you believed Hollywood, you'd think medieval life was one long, gluten laden slog. According to this well worn myth, peasants lived on bread and water alone, which, if true, would have put medieval dentists out of work. Lucky them. But let's bite into the facts. Bread was a staple, and yes, sometimes a dental hazard, but it shared the spotlight with porridge, creamy dairy, garden fresh veggies, and on festive days, the occasional cameo of meat or fish. The real culinary star? Pottage. This endlessly inventive stew made modern leftovers look Michelin worthy. Peas, barley, a heroic pile of onions, and even last week's turnip tossed in for good measure. Voilà, cuisine à la commune. And the drinks menu? Water, you say? Forget it. Most peasants brewed and guzzled weak ale by the mugful. The wedding? Held at a friend, even the cake was hush hush. The marriage was morganatic, a word fancy enough to make your the fallout. Family drama for the ages, PR headaches, and a monarchy wobblier than a Sunday trifle. The difference between sharing pottage and hogging venison, who knew scandal could be so chic? Their hard lives extended to education, where it was assumed few could read or write. Love's worth a really nice palace, dragons or not. The job post? Wanted. Quiet soul who can chant psalms and manage wax spills. Must know your ABCs, just popular lore loves to keep it monastic, as if literacy were some magical gift doled out only with tonsures and scratchy wool habits. But record scratch, the stereotype of clueless peasants staring blankly at parchment like it might bite, is seriously overdone. Sure, some folks couldn't tell a bee from a butter churn, but reading wasn't just a haloed hobby. Urban merchants kept ledgers tighter than their purse strings. Noblewomen penned poetry, and even the odd townie picked up a pen. What's next? Medieval Twitter? Monasteries did nurture learning, painstakingly copying texts one Latin phrase at a time, but they definitely didn't hold the exclusive rights. If monks founded the medieval reading club, plenty of secular folks were sneaking in by the 12th century. Secular schools popped up in growing cities where students could enroll, no tonsure, robe, or chanting required. If only monks read, who penned all those snarky, passive aggressive royal letters. Dear neighbor, please return my oxen. Sincerely, not your friend. The truth, literacy rates were low by today's standards, but still surprisingly vibrant beyond the cloister. The real dividing lines? social class, cash flow, and gender. So next time you picture the Middle Ages, don't imagine a silent abbey world. Sometimes, joining the medieval reading club just took deep pockets and a taste for parchment, gleaming scalp optional. This lack of education perhaps fed into the harsh and unfair nature of medieval justice. Forget trial by jury. Medieval courts preferred trial by ordeal. Evidence irrelevant. The real question, can you clutch a red hot iron without screaming like a banshee? Welcome to medieval law, where everyone's a contestant, from muddy booted serfs to nobles juggling more titles than common sense. Think the peasants got all the gruesome fun, while nobles sipped mead in comfort? Nope. Justice was beautifully democratic. Peasants and aristocrats alike could be dunked in icy rivers or forced to moonwalk across hot coals. Your shiny coat of arms meant zip when the judge's legal playbook was basically, let's see what happens if. Laws were polite suggestions, judges, improvisational comedians. Today's challenge, trial by fire. Unless I'm feeling peckish, then it's river dunking, head first for extra fairness. Penalties ranged from fines and public shaming to losing a limb, or on a particularly grumpy day, your head. On the bright side, lose a hand and boom, one less appendage to prosecute you with. Public punishments? Village wide spectator sports, complete with snacks that probably should have stayed medieval. A breeze of legal reform eventually blew through, but for centuries, justice was less about fairness and more like a grim game of roulette. Survive the ordeal? You're innocent, unless the judge's lunch disagreed with him. Either way, medieval justice was always a show, just not one you wanted a front row seat for. Despite such cruelty, knights and the ideal of chivalry were thought to dominate society. Picture medieval Europe, a continent bursting with armored heroes, elegant jousts, damsels serenading from castle towers, and the ever present scent of roasted turkey legs drifting on the breeze. Thanks to movies and childhood play, we imagine every hill conceals a galloping knight, ready to recite the chivalric code between mouthfuls of mutton. The Middle Ages? One giant Renaissance fair, minus the smartphone equipped turkey leg vendors. But here's the myth, polished shinier than a fresh suit of chainmail. Medieval Europe was practically overrun with noble knights, clashing for glory and upholding an unbreakable moral code. Chivalry, we're told, ruled the land, keeping peasants and princes equally honorable and oh so virtuous. If every landowner was a knight, Game of Thrones would just be medieval LinkedIn. Now it's time to joust that fantasy right off its horse. Knights were actually a tiny, well-heeled club. Armor and war horses were the medieval equivalent of owning a Ferrari with a penthouse view. Most people saw chainmail about as often as you see a Ferrari parked on the lawn. That chivalric code? History's original terms and conditions, waved around to sound impressive, but rarely read, let alone followed. Peasants weren't quoting chivalry manuals. They were grumbling about mud, taxes, and the neighbor's goat. The truth? Most knights spent less time sword fighting and more time drowning in feudal paperwork, managing their estates, and inventing creative excuses for why the other guy definitely started the brawl after the third goblet of mead. Chivalry often meant offering polite justifications for bad behavior, like saying, "It's not my fault, his joust was way out of line." So, next time you picture medieval Europe, swap that army of gleaming knights for a handful of well dressed landowners, elbow deep in estate ledgers. And remember, the real battles were often fought with quills, not swords. Yet, even with the presence of knights, the general population often faced very short lifespans. Imagine blowing out 30 candles, then promptly snuffing out your chances of a 31st. Harsh? Apparently, if you weren't royalty or a vampire, ancient Rome and medieval Europe handed you a best before age 30 sticker. So much for a midlife crisis. Better get that existential meltdown done by 15. Trade your donkey for a stallion, kid, because your time's almost up. Here's the myth. People in the olden days all shuffled off this mortal coil at an age when most of us are just figuring out 401ks or still drowning in student loans. But that gloomy average life expectancy of 30 or 35 years, it's a funeral sized misunderstanding. Those numbers lumped in everyone, babies and children included, who were dropping like flies thanks to disease, famine, and doctors whose best remedy was leeches for all. The fact? Survive childhood's deadly gauntlet, and your odds of making it to 50, 60, or even your 70s were surprisingly decent. People have always aged, old enough to moan about creaky knees, stress over harvests, and yes, grumble about kids these days. Archaeologists regularly dig up grandparent age skeletons with bones worn from decades of telling youngsters, back in my day. So don't let those grim averages fool you into thinking the past was a never ending teenage party cut short. The real catch? Living long then meant braving medieval dentistry, making today's root canals feel like a luxury retreat. Aging gracefully? That was having more teeth than offspring, a true flex in any era. Amid these hardships, women's lives were particularly constrained, limited to domestic roles, and deprived of rights. Picture a world where the only glass ceiling women faced was the one they were busy scrubbing above the chandelier. In the grand medieval narrative, folks often imagine women chained to bread ovens, waving feebly at passing knights, their ambitions as flat as yesterday's gruel. The myth goes, medieval gals were just good for kneading dough and producing heirs. Never mind, some of them needed bread and bank accounts simultaneously. But let's zoom out from the kitchen. Many women ran bustling estates, thriving businesses, and, brace yourself, even entire kingdoms. This wasn't coupon clipping power, it was the real deal. The most potent weapon in a medieval woman's arsenal wasn't a rolling pin, but legal ownership of property. Queens, regents, and savvy widows called the shots with zero fainting couches in sight. Not all ambition wore a crown. Nunneries could make Ivy League faculties sweat. Centers of literacy, learning, and local politics that'd make city councils blush. Urban women joined guilds, ran artisanal workshops, and some became respected merchants. Whoever said, a woman's place is in the home, clearly never had to organize a peasant tax revolt. Meanwhile, peasant women managed households, worked fields and markets, and juggled family finances with a steely efficiency that could shame modern CFOs. The only thing medieval women needed more than bread was a fair share of the family fortune. And though medieval laws were patchy, they sometimes recognized women's rights to property and inheritance, a reminder that every old idea was once revolutionary. So the next time someone claims medieval women were passive, picture one leading a trade caravan, quill in one hand, ledger in the other, ready to shatter a few actual ceilings.